Okay, this is going to be a webinar on keeping your crops fresh for market. My name is Scott Sanford, and I'm an outreach specialist at the University of Wisconsin. This work was funded by a grant from SARE to look at storage for fall harvested crops, but we're going to deal with basically all harvested crops for what we're talking about today. So what affects the length of storage? And that's basically kind of what our theme is going to be about today. So it's temperature, humidity, the quality of the product at harvest. We can't improve what goes into storage. We can only maintain it. So it's going to depend on the stage of ripening and any disease or decay issues. It's also going to depend on handling from harvest to post-harvest. So bruises, cuts, scrapes, skin breaks. Those are all avenues for disease entry and bacteria entry, fungal entry into our produce. And basically we can't improve the quality, we can only maintain it, is the buzzword. So I thought I'd take us back and kind of the steps of physiological development and breakdown basically of a fruit. So this pictorial here shows, from the flower basically through cell expansion, through maturing, to ripening, to senescence. And through that process, we're going to have water loss. We've got, we can have, physiological breakdown. We can have water loss. It's a natural ripening process. We can have temperature injury, either high or low temperature. Physical damage, which I already alluded to, which usually opens the way for microorganisms. And then there's interactions between these. So sometimes we can have temperature injury, and as a result, we get a fungal disease or a bacterial disease. And temperature influences all these and the speed at which they happen. So temperature is a critical factor. If we have low temperature, it can suppress enzyme degradation or softening. It also reduces respiration rates. Basically, when you pick something, it's still alive. It's still converting sugars or starches into sugars and feeding off those. So it's producing water and CO2, and in some cases, ethylene, which is a ripening hormone. Lower temperature will reduce water loss. It can slow decay of produce from microorganisms. Some aren't very active at low temperatures, and it reduces ethylene production or the reaction to it. So one of the most important things, depending on the type of fruit or produce, is removal of field heat. So the method of removal can depend on the commodity, and we're going to go into some pre-cooling here in a minute. But if we just put it in a cooler, sometimes we don't have enough capacity, refrigeration capacity, to remove that. And the type of produce, whether it's leafy, a fruit, a tuber, that'll also affect the speed and how we can remove field heat and how critical it is to remove it fast. Airflow through and around the product will increase the removal of the heat exchange rate and the removal of field heat. The volume of produce, if we just have a handful of something versus tons of something, that's going to be a whole lot difference for how fast and what methods we can use for removing field heat. If we have mixed commodities, that can affect both how we're going to store that and how long it takes to remove field heat. Cooling capacity refrigeration system, of course. And then we have economic constraints. Maybe we can't afford that bigger compressor, or the energy cost is too high. So we may have to look at some other options for cooling. The other is market expectations and requirements. there are some products that are iced, and that's basically, you know, it's the market expectation. It's always been done that way, so it'll always continue to be done that way. So we run into that on occasion. The rate of cooling is pretty important for some things. Some things you want to cool them as fast as others. Some products, like potatoes or onions, need to be cured before they're cooled off. So it will depend on the type of product as to what that requirement is. So in pre-cooling, we've got a couple different kinds. The first one is hydrocooling, which is basically a water bath or a shower. And it's very fast because the heat transfer to water from the air or product is very fast. So it's a lot faster than air cooling. The disadvantage is it can be a path to disease and pathogen transmission. So if you get one piece of bad fruit in there and you're recirculating the water, it can affect the whole batch of fruit or produce. So that's an issue. So often we're going to use some kind of sanitizer in the water to try to control that. So things like apples, asparagus, snap beans, cantaloupe, cucumbers, leafy vegetables, or leafy greens, peas, and green onions can all be hydrocooled. The other is using a dedicated cooling room. So if we just have cooling in a room, it's often too slow. But if we can force air around the product, it'll cool faster. So one option is what we call Plenum Wall. So this picture up here shows a Plenum Wall. Where you build a special wall, you've got the cooling in the wall. The airflow is basically around like this and through the product. So you're forcing air through the product much faster, and we get higher heat transfer rate to cool the product faster. This lower picture, this is another pictorial of it, where you've got an opening in here. You got the product stacked up against it, so it'll go through this opening, through the big opening, up and around, and then recirculate around. The other thing we can do is just basically a stack of pallets. So we got a stack of pallets here. We put the produce on a pallet. We leave actually a space in between here. We can cover it with this canvas, and the canvas usually had some bars or lath to support it so it doesn't collapse in. We've got a fan here, so it's going to pull air through the product into that plenum area and out through the fan back into the room, and we'll let the refrigeration in the room do the cooling. This fan needs to be more than just a box fan you go to Walmart and buy. It's basically going to be a higher pressure fan like you'd use for ventilation of a building type fan. So here's some pictures of one. So you can see they have these battens that keep this canvas from collapsing in this case. And here they have units, refrigeration units on the wall, against the wall here that is stacked against. Here's a couple more pictures of some other items where you'd stack this pile, and this unit might sit against this end here to pull that air through it instead of the one against the wall here. So just some examples of air pre-cooling. As I mentioned before, ice packs can be done. So you need about 1 pound of ice for every 3 pounds of fruit to reduce it about 45 degrees. So asparagus, broccoli, cantaloupe, green onions, leafy greens, sweet corn even, can be iced to reduce that field heat. Then we have respiration rates. Respiration rates, there's some are low to high, different types of respiration rate, and this has to do with the temperature. The high respiration fruit, we want to get that cooled as fast as possible so we don't convert starches or sugars or reduced sweetness, basically. So getting those cold as fast as possible is important. And I've referenced a publication here from North Dakota, or not North Dakota, North Carolina, that covers this topic. So respiration rates, they're dependent on temperature. As the temperature decreases, the heat generation from the fruit or vegetable will decrease. So here's an example. We said that asparagus was high. So you can see it's more than 10 times higher than apples at the same temperature. And then it drops dramatically as the temperature cools. So it's important to get that cooled as fast as possible to do that. So humidity is also very important. When you sell something, you're basically selling water. So if you lose water, you're losing profits. So like up here in this picture, some shriveled apples. Well, they may be edible, but they're not necessarily marketable. So that's important. So water loss is one of the main causes of deterioration and loss of marketability. Wilting and shriveling. So here's some lettuce that's a little wilted, and that water loss will increase with temperature and with airspeed. So we just previously talked about air cooling. Well, once it's cool, we want to reduce that air ventilation rate. And in some cases, depending on the product, too much humidity can cause the disease and rots, but it will highly depend on what we're talking about, the type of produce. So humidity addition is going to be important because when we have a cold storage room, the refrigeration is dehumidifying, so we're going to need to add humidity back. And there's a number of different pieces of equipment that can do that. And this is one of the things that we find most often missing in a cold storage on a vegetable storage place, especially on farm. So you can use, room dehumidifier type thing or humidifier type thing. The big workhorse in the industry is what we call a centrifugal atomizer. And we got two pictures of one. This is actually a centrifugal atomizer. This is a small one. This will put roughly a gallon or two of water per hour into the air. Be adequate for a small storage space, maybe 12 by 12 or smaller. This bottom one here is a commercial scale, and they come anywhere from 24 to 36 gallons per hour, but they're adjustable, and that'd be for more of a commercial size storage. But I've seen these in small storage where they just turn down the rate, and they don't have to run them as much. If you're in a bulk storage situation, we can use an evaporative cooling pad, and this is an example of what an evaporative cooling pad would look like. We've got airflow from fans blowing the air through a pad. It's usually a cardboard type material that's saturated with water, and the air flows through little holes in there and is cooled and increases in humidity. The other thing we can do if we maybe we have multiple things in a storage and some require less humidity than the other, we could pack some things in plastic bags to increase humidity around that thing. So it could be in a big pallet bin with maybe something like burlap in the bottom to provide some wicking for water to hold that water into the bin without having a puddle of water. And then we cover it with plastic. Or it can be something like packaging, maybe carrots in the bags they're going to be sold in, and that will help hold the plastic in, or the moisture in. So those are some possible ways we can contain moisture. Humidity or humidistat is important. I'm sorry, for some reason my title there got moved, but humidistat is what that's supposed to say, or humidity control, is pretty important so that we don't have to do it manually, because we're guessing we're not going to necessarily be accurate all the time. And it doesn't take very long to start losing humidity. So these should, if you're going to go buy one, they should have a range to 99%. If you're doing products that are 90% higher relative humidity, we'd recommend that the accuracy be plus or minus 3 to 4%. You're not going to get a plus or minus 1% type thing. Humidity is a little tough to measure, but as the price goes up, the accuracy will decrease or increase. I'm sorry. So I think this unit here is 2% accurate. Just for an example, we need a resolution of 1% or less. So that's the smallest digit or the smallest increment we can set the adjust the setting to. And then the other issue is that as the accuracy is going to decrease as we get above 90%, it just gets tougher to measure the humidity above 90%. So any type of device, measuring device, at the extremes of their range, the accuracy will be less. It is desirable to have a remote sensor so that we can locate that in the best place, which is usually in the airflow. So this one down here, this has a remote sensor to it. So this sensor could be put in the airstream, and then it's got a cable so that the controller itself could be put either in dry location or just basically out of the airstream. Cost is somewhere between $140 and $500, depending on the accuracy and features and benefits you get out of it. So here's a picture of one. So this is one of the commercial ones. So I took a series of pictures as it started running to show the fog coming into the building. Now, this one is more than what you'd really is desirable. The next picture of this series I couldn't put in because the whole room's basically fogged by then. So ideally what it should be is just a very fine mist kind of. Ideally you'd want these running about 80% of the time to just put a little fine mist into the air to maintain that relative humidity. The other issue that we can run into is the evaporator is improperly sized for vegetable or fruit storage. So refrigeration is going to dehumidify the air no matter what. That's a fact of life. But the one way we can reduce the amount of humidity control or dehumidification is a temperature drop across the evaporator. The greater the temperature drop, the greater dehumidification that will occur. So if we want to keep it above 90%, we've got to have it less than 2-degree temperature drop across that evaporator. If you go by a beer cooler, that's going to be more in the 7 to 10 degree temperature drop across that thing. So then we're going to be, in the 60 to 70, maybe 80% range. So we're not going to be anywhere high enough humidity to maintain quality produce for long-term storage anyway. So that's an issue. So this is something when you go buy the unit, you have to specify that you need one that has a low temperature drop across the evaporator plates, and basically that means you're going to have a very large evaporator surface for the BTU removal rate. So what kind of temperature ranges do we need and humidity ranges? Well, we've kind of classified them by different types of crops, kind of in bundles. So we've got cold and wet, or very high humidity, which is basically going to be 32 degrees and 95 to 100 percent relative humidity. And what falls into this is most root crops, with the exception of potatoes and cabbage. Cabbage will fall into there. And we've got a lot of our produce. So leafy vegetables, peas, sweet corn, spinach, broccoli. And then we have cold and humid. So this would be basically 90 to 95%. So snap beans, cantaloupe, tomatoes, although tomatoes, I think sometimes you want them a little warmer if you're trying to ripen them. If you get green tomatoes, they need to be warmer than this. Potatoes would fall into this category as well. And then we have warm and moist. We got green tomatoes. We've got cucumbers that would fall into this range. Then we have cold and dry, which is our onions. Onions, garlic, shallots would fall into that range to keep them from spoiling or rooting, or sprouting, I should say. And then we have some specialty crops. So we've got winter squash that have requirements. We've got sweet potatoes. Here's hot peppers. Most of these are warmer temperatures and lower relative humidities. And if we get some of these, if we get them too cold, you'll get chilling injury. Which brings up temperature injury. Basically, it can be either from hot or cold. It can be from alternating temperatures. And some of the symptoms of heat injury are going to be bleaching, surface burn, uneven ripening, excessive softening, and desiccation or water loss. So I kind of put this on this picture. You got a load of, I'm not sure, it looks like maybe cantaloupe or watermelon here, and I think it's watermelon maybe, and you got a broke down truck. You know, that's an issue because this stuff is high respiration rate, and you really need to get it to a place where it can be chilled in order to maintain that quality. Then we have on the other end, we've got the chilling injury. So tropical origin type fruits and vegetables, that can happen pretty rapidly. It can be things like pitting and surface decay, so snap beans and cucumbers. Cucumbers, if you get them too cold, they will deteriorate, and we'll go show you some pictures of that. Internal browning, that's a common with apples. They're stored at right near 32 degrees, so if we don't have good control, we get something that looks like this, where you get a browning. Surface scald on eggplant, we get the objectionable flavor, water soaking or water spots, poor color ripening, sweetness in potatoes, hard when cooked, so that's the sweet potatoes. You know, but the biggest issue is that the injury may be hidden. So like the apple, you don't know it until the consumer gets it and cuts it open and he finds it all brown on the inside. So it's not, you know, that's one issue. If it's like this with the pepper here, where you've got deterioration on the outside, that's easy to see and sort out. So that's just something to keep in mind. So here's an example of temperature injury in cucumbers. So it's stored 5 days at 20 degrees. It was stored 9 days at these different temperatures, and then 5 days at 20 degrees, and you can see the difference in the degradation. So just you get rot starting here. You got some desiccation here. This one looks pretty normal, but there may be something on the bottom here. No, that may be normal. That looks like it's supposed to be our control. But just to show example. Here's example with tomatoes. You you got these over on this side that got chilled and they're not putting on color, versus the ones that were ripened at the correct temperature are nice and ripe. And here's what happens. You get alternaria after 10 days after being chilled. So it's just an example. Ethylene injury can also be a problem. We never want to store ethylene producers, so something like apples and pears. With many of our other fruits, they're susceptible to ethanol injury, or ethylene injury, not ethanol, ethylene. So here's a leafy vegetable that's showing spots, and these won't show up right away. So this might be, a week or so after being harvested or exposed that this happens. And here it just shows, some fruit that's spoiling or not coloring up right because of ethylene injury. So for long-term storage, we need to worry about compatibility. So things like apples and pears should always be stored in by themselves. And we never want to store them with things that are ethylene sensitive. So celery, cabbage, carrots, potatoes, onions. Onions are also a problem because they transfer odor. Many things that transfer odors also will absorb odors themselves. So we never want to store meats, eggs, or dairy with any kind of produce, and that's a food safety issue. But anyway, you can read through the rest of the list here. And then the other incompatibility is actually temperature issues of storage as well. The length of storage of different types of produce will vary, and some we can store for up to 12 months pretty successfully. Some we can only store for a couple months. They just don't have the shelf life. So we need to be aware of what the normal storage life would be of these products and get them marketed within that reasonable period of time. We also need to be aware of the quality of the produce entering. Year to year, you can take winter squash. Some years it'll last 3, 4, 5 months. Some years it barely lasts 2 months. So we need to understand the quality of the product coming in and what the expected length of storage may be because of the quality that it's coming in. So we also, in storage, we need to monitor for disease and rots. If we got something that's starting to rot, we need to sort for one, and we may want to maybe drop our price so we can move what we have so it's not a total loss. Humidity and temperature is vital in the storage length scenario, so to keep it in good quality. And we have to be aware of freezing point and chill point for products, because sometimes we're storing them very close to those points to keep them maintained for long periods of time. So here's an example of this summer produce, so the optimal temperature, optimal relative humidity, and the expected storage length for these products. So asparagus, 36 degrees, 100% humidity basically. We can store 2 to 3 weeks. There's other products that you want to move pretty fast. Of course, the faster you move it, the better off we are. For winter products or storage products, a lot of these are near 32 degrees, and most of them are going to be high humidity, as we went through this before. But, for example, things like winter squash really don't store that long. So we need to move them fairly rapidly versus something like potatoes, which can be actually up to a year in some cases. So we just need to be aware of the differences and try to market them within that reasonable period of time. One of the issues that we also run into is, we talked about field heat removal earlier on, is sometimes that's a factor of not having adequate refrigeration. So the refrigeration needs to be sized to overcome field heat, to feel the heat of respiration, conduction heat loss through the structure, infiltration heat loss, which is basically the opening and closing of the doors. That's going to be the bulk of it. And then internal heat generation, lights, fans, fork trucks, people working in the cooler all add heat that the refrigeration load has to take out. And we have to look at the worst case scenario. So it's going to be the warm day during the summer when we're putting 2 tons of beans in there, and it's 95 in the shade. So that's what we need to size this refrigeration to handle. The rest of the year it's going to be not going to run at full capacity, but we need to size it for those full capacity days. So this is just an example of how big the field heat can be compared to the rest of the load. So this shows an apple storage and whether I fill it in 8 days or 10 days. So the faster I fill it, the higher the refrigeration load is going to be, or the refrigeration requirement, compared to the rest of the year. The rest of the year is basically only 10 to 15% of the load we have during harvest. So factors for removal of field heat. One can be the type of packaging or container we put it in. If we have solid sides and bottom, we're not going to get airflow through that, versus slotted sides and bottom. And there was a study, I don't remember the numbers, but it was like half the time for cooling just having 10% slotted bottom versus a solid side. It's a pretty significant thing. If something is bagged, that's going to slow because the heat in that bag is going to have to go through the bag by conduction, and then it can be convection after that. But if we have the produce in a bag, it's not going to transfer heat very fast out of that bag, so it's an issue. So anytime we bag something, we need to have it cooled down pretty close to storage temperature before we put it in that bag. So we already talked about low refrigeration capacity. That's an issue for removal of field heat. Airflow rate. The higher the airflow rate, the faster we can get heat transfer and remove field heat. So that's why earlier we talked about the Plenum Wall, or the fans on the end of a pallet to try to increase that airflow rate and that heat transfer rate. Most crops we want to rapidly remove field heat. Basically, the faster we do it, the better the shelf life we're going to have typically. The exception is if a product needs to be cured. So onions, potatoes, sweet potatoes have to be cured. Although they can be too hot, we need to look at what temperatures we're harvesting them at, and make sure we get them cooled down so they're stable at least while they're curing. So an airflow circulation is important. So if we have a bulk storage, we're going to have an airflow where it comes down through plenum. It's going to pick up. It's going to be cooled and pick up moisture, and then come back up through the product. So we need to have this floor or distribution system for the air through the produce to be sized correctly, and so that we get proper airflow through that. The other is loading. We don't want to load this too high, or we get a higher pressure differential. The other is the fans that push the airflow have to be sized correctly for the pressure drop through that thing. Typically, when we're doing bulk storage, we're going to try to maintain the temperature difference between the bottom of the pile and the top of the pile to about 1 degree or 1.5 degrees, and is usually sufficient to maintain product quality. If the temperature starts going up, that means we need to increase our airflow rate. If it goes down below 1, that means we can usually reduce the airflow rate. So that's one way we can look at how much airflow we need through the product by looking at the temperatures. So here's an example of bulk storage. This happens to be potatoes. So there's two types of systems used. One is these culverts, and they get a row of holes here on the bottom that distribute the air. So they'd be on both sides to push the air through. And these are spaced about 8-10 feet apart throughout the storage. Here's a smaller storage facility. This has a floor distribution system. So there's actually boards here with slots between them. And then they have air distribution on the sides here to put the air into that. And then the return is up here and back down underneath. So that's an example. Now, it's important that we have proper humidity as well as temperature entering into the pile. If we lose humidity, especially on the bottom of the pile, we will lose water, and then we get pressure bruising. Pressure bruising is basically, if you looked at a, let's try that again. Looked at a potato, and we got this little pocket on the top. That's what we call pressure bruising. Basically, it couldn't support the weight of the product that was above it, so that it basically got pushed in or collapsed. With regular cold storage, it's important that we have proper clearance between the product and the ceiling and the product and the walls to basically get that airflow pattern to go down around through the product and back up to circulate. So we want nothing stacked above the evaporator up here. So this area up here should all be clear. The other is we want some space on the sides as well as the ends here to get airflow around. The other issue is when we're looking at stacking containers, especially if I have two-way slots in our bins, we need some kind of airspace between the floor and the containers, and between levels of containers, so that air has a passage to flow through here and back. So that's important to look at. One thing I like about the Plenum Wall thing is we can use it for pre-cooling, but we can also use it for very positive airflow for long-term storage. So in this case, your air is coming down through the refrigeration system and the humidification system. Enters into the stack of boxes in different places, and then it either goes up through the produce or down through the bin of produce, and then out through the fork slot on the every other row. So it'll go out and recirculate. So that's one where you get very positive airflow to try to maintain that temperature and good humidity control within the product. So I already talked about bins. Wood, one of the biggest disadvantages of wood is it absorbs moisture and harbors disease. So sanitation of those is a little tougher. One advantage, people like them because they can build them themselves or repair them easily. Plastic is really the optimal because they're very easy to sanitize, but they do need to be an FDA-approved material. Any of these products need to be rated for the load we're going to put into them, and how high we're going to stack them. So sometimes these may be rated for maybe 1,000 pounds, but if we stack them, it's only 800 pounds a piece. So we need to know that and how high we can stack them. Some are stackable with the lids, and some have lids. So Having a lid can be an advantage if we want to create a microclimate, but if we want to stack them and we don't want to use a lid, but it requires a lid to stack, then that's a disadvantage. So we've already talked about the slots in there. So here's an example of a bin with about 10% slots in the bottom of it. The other thing we can do is use racking to increase air flow rate or heat exchange rate. So racking, basically, or shelving, putting in a cooler, it allows accessibility for individual containers, better airflow around, keeps things off the floor, which is a food safety issue. And if we've got these wire racks like this versus a solid floor, that actually helps get airflow up through as well. And a rolling cart, this one here happens to be a rolling cart. That could be an advantage for a small walk-in cooler because maybe I can throw something in the aisle to get better space utilization in that cooler as well. Storage loading, you know, I kind of alluded this previously. One, if we've got fork slots, we want them all the same way, so we get the basically airflow down and then through the product and back to get good airflow. The other issue with storage loading is we want to, can we access things without moving things? I remember going and visiting a grower, and I asked him how his carrots were doing, and he had to climb across about 3 things to get the carrots to show me one, versus being able to walk down the aisle and pick one off the shelf. Now, there's issues in both cases with space utilization. If you got aisles, that tends to be wasted space, but you also have to look at the labor of getting things in and out. There is how order of use, first in, first out, or last in, first out. If you need to rotate stock, then we need to set for first in, first out. Then we need to set the cooler up so we can do that as well. And any cooler should be convenient to the packaging and process area. Some rules of thumb are it's going to require about 2.5 to 3 cubic feet per volume per bushel. So we're going to have about 50% utilization of a cooler. And we've already talked about having enough air space between the walls and ceiling to get good airflow through that. But just from a space budgeting standpoint, that's something you can use. So I want to show some storage issues here just kind of quickly, some space layout. If we don't have our bin size correctly, we get this wasted space. And the other thing we end up with, if the door is not in the right place, we end up not being able to utilize the space correctly. So this isn't necessarily a product quality issue, but it does affect space utilization, which is money. If we get the door and everything sized in here correctly, we can get things in and out conveniently with minimum wasted space. The other is accessibility. We can put racking for aisles, so we can do that first in, first out, or first in, yeah, last in, first out. So something like this, if this was the last in, that's going to be the first out way this is set up. If we stick another door in there, then we could be first in, first out, because we can pull things out this backside and leave these in. Now, you may want to get rid of these so you can access this racking in this scenario. But just an example. The other thing is, if we only have one door, you could set up something like this where you can get in and out and have some racking so you can rotate stock. One thing I would encourage farmers to do, or growers to do, is to do flow charts of every crop you need to look at the steps of how it goes. And basically, I would do these from planting on. So you've got, from the field to washing, to bulk bins and into storage, and then and what the storage temperature is, and then it's come out, it's getting sorted. What are we going to do with the culls and stuff? How's it going to be packaged? What are you going to do between packaging and going to market? Do we need short-term storage, etc.? And if you want an example, I would refer you to Roxy Farm Harvest Manual. This is a farm in Kinderhook, New York, and they have their harvest manual posted online. And it's very in-depth of every product, goes through the steps of how to do almost everything required, from the seeding rate to what seeder you're going to use, etc. So that would be an example of a process, a written process, or procedure manual. Building layout's important, basically from for reducing wasted time, etc. So this is an example of one where you've got the coolers on one wall. We come in from the field, we can go through our washer or coolers. We can go into the cooler. When it's time to pack, it comes out, goes through our sorting line. Or maybe we come in from the field and go through the sorting line. It just depends on the process we use for different products. And then after the sorting line, it can go another cooler and then out to the loading dock to go to market. So kind of looking at how things flow through a facility has quality connotations, because if it sits out too long, that can reduce shelf life. In any time we're doing storage, we're going to have shrinkage. Now, during summer, we probably have less of it because the products aren't around that long. The biggest challenge we have during the summer is probably desiccation or wilting. So that's why humidity controls, but we probably don't have problems with spoilage as much during the summer because they're not on the shelf that long. But things that are stored for long periods of time, we can have different things. So things like squash and onions, experience from growers is 20 to 30% spoilage with long-term storage. Root crops is quite a bit less, with 3 to 10%, and that typically is culls. With cabbage, it can be 15 to 40%, and they typically storage diseases. So we've got some examples of storage or diseases in general. So you got white rot. This one's what we call red heart, which is basically from being frozen. Here's a dry rot, which can come out of the field or be caused by a cut. Here's another one down here. It shows this was probably from a nick or a cut on one end, and the rot's coming through. With winter squash, it's often just because it's either stored at the wrong temperature or stored too long. So anacrose or dry rot are some examples. The other thing, you know, freezing can be a problem. My collaborator on this project, he lost a cooler full of carrots because it got too cold during one winter. And people laugh when I say, in northern climates, you need a heater in this cold storage, because if you get temperatures lower than the storage temperatures, you're going to have heat loss out of the storage facility and require some heating to maintain that. So you can see in this facility here, we've got a heater on the wall, basically electrical resistance heater to add some heat into this squash storage room. Now, whenever we put heat in, we also need to do air mixing as well, so that we don't get stratification of the air. So that's important as well. One of the issues is, though, when we do heating, we'll have lower humidity, so we have to add humidity back into the room as well. The other thing we can do for outside temperature control, using outside air for cooling, this will have lower humidity, so that has quality implications. You know, if you're trying to do it al naturel with a root cellar or natural outside air, you got to realize that when you pull in that cold air, it's lower humidity and it's going to cause desiccation. So we need some humidification to maintain the quality of that product. The other thing for small growers they run into is I've got 15 different crops and I'm storing them all in one unit, but they have different requirements for temperature as we discussed earlier. So we may need to look at multiple units. Depending on what your mix of crops is, you may need 2, 3, maybe 4 different coolers or storage rooms, depending on what the requirements are. So something like sweet potato doesn't need a cooler necessary, but it needs a controlled atmosphere room because they're at much warmer temperatures. So this just gives you some ideas of the pricing of coolers. If you do need a cooler, the USDA has a loan program for coolers. This is for new facilities. So you can get a low-interest loan. I don't know if this is probably not the current loan rate, but they're low-interest loans, 15% down, up to $500,000. So these have to be new. They have to be permanent structure. They can be framed or fabricated, prefab, either way, but they just have to be permanently fixed with a refrigeration system and lighting controls and useful life of more than 15 years or more. So here's a link to that thing. So in summary, we have to harvest quality produce, we have to cool it, we have to store it at the optimal temperature and humidity, we have to make sure we don't put products together or produce together that have storage compatibility issues. We need to prevent chill injury, so we need controllers that control the temperatures accurately, especially when we're keeping some of those products right near their freeze points or chill points. We're going to need heat in a cooler in northern climates to prevent freezing. We need to monitor produce going into storage for the quality, and we need to monitor produce when it gets in storage or while it's in storage to make sure that it's staying in good quality. And we need to mark it within a reasonable period of time based on the typical length that it will last in storage and for the quality. And we need to sanitize the cooler facility and containers between seasons or between uses to reduce the transmission of different types of diseases and fungal diseases. We do have a new publication that's coming out. So if you're interested in this, you can go to the learning store .uwbx.edu, and if you search for A4105, you should find this publication. It's pretty in-depth in the planning, design, and operation of a cold storage facility targeted at fall harvested crops, but it really pertains to most harvested crops. And here's some other references that you may find useful for looking at post-harvest handling of different crops. So I put that up for reference. And if you have questions, since this was a recorded webinar, you can email me or call me, and we can discuss your issue. With that, we'll conclude. Thank you.